Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into some serious drama.
Oh, you know it. Always up for a little family drama, especially the kind with ancient curses. And, well, you'll hear.
This time, we're going deep into Genesis chapter 30. And let me tell you, this isn't your average Sunday school story.
We're unpacking a podcast called Scripture Straight Talk that gets right into the messy, complicated lives of these biblical figures.
And trust me, it gets messy. We're talking jealousy, rivalry, even some questionable ancient fertility treatments. It's a lot.
But that's what makes it so fascinating, right? It's like, yeah, these stories are thousands of years old, but the emotions, the desires, they're so relatable.
Exactly. It's like holding up a mirror to, well, human nature. And this chapter kicks off with Jacob and his two wives, Rachel and Leah.
And right away, we're thrown into the deep end of their struggle with infertility, which back then wasn't just a personal heartache, it was a whole social status thing.
And Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife, she is not dealing with it well. In the podcast, they have this voice actor portraying her. And when she cries out to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." Chills, man.
It's raw. It's desperate. You can feel the weight of societal expectations, like having children was the ultimate measure of a woman's worth.
Which, let's be honest, we still kind of grapple with today, right? Maybe not always about children specifically, but that pressure to achieve certain things by a certain age.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like we've all got this invisible checklist, the career, the relationship, the house, and we're racing against the clock to check all the boxes.
And when we don't, well, for Rachel, it throws her into this spiral of blame and resentment. She even lashes out at Jacob like it's his fault she can't conceive.
I mean, can you imagine the frustration? It speaks to how deeply she longed for a child, how all-consuming that desire was.
And poor Jacob, he's just like, look, I'm just a guy. I can't just will a baby into existence.
Right, like I'm not a miracle worker here. But even acknowledging that doesn't erase Rachel's pain, and here's where it gets even more complicated.
Because enter Leah, Rachel's sister. And Leah, well, yeah, she can have children.
In fact, she's already popped out a few sons by this point.
Talk about adding fuel to the fire. Suddenly, it's not just about infertility, it's about this competition between sisters.
And the podcast does a great job of showing Leah's side of it, too. Like, sure, she's got the kids, but she can feel Jacob's preference for Rachel.
So it's like this double whammy of insecurity. She's worried about her sister and whether her husband truly loves her.
Which honestly is such a classic human dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Feeling enough, measuring up. It's timeless.
Totally. And this whole dynamic just sets the stage for some, let's just say, interesting choices. Like when Rachel, in her desperation, offers her maidservant to Jacob as a surrogate.
Yeah, that's definitely where we have to pause and remember the cultural context. It's easy to judge by today's standards, but back then, it was a different world.
Still, you can't help but wonder, what were they thinking? And it just goes to show how far people will go to get what they want, even if it means, well, bending the rules a bit.
It's like the podcast host said, we're still doing it today, just in different ways, right?
Yeah.
Trying to find those external solutions to internal struggle.
Exactly. Like that new car or that promotion is somehow going to magically fix everything.
When really it's usually about something much deeper. But hey, sometimes you got to learn the hard way, right?
And in this case, Rachel's little shortcut just adds more fuel to the fire. I mean, talk about a recipe for disaster. 2 sisters, 1 husband, and now children in the mix. You don't need a PhD in family therapy to see that's not going to end well.
Oh, it's about to get messier. And those mandrakes, let's say those aren't your average garden variety. So, yeah, about those mandrakes.
Okay, mandrakes. Honestly, when I first heard about this whole thing, I thought, is this like some ancient herbal remedy I've never heard of?
Right. Like some weird health food craze. But no, in the ancient world, these things were basically seen as magic, like actual magic, especially for fertility.
Like, eat this plant and bam, pregnant.
Pretty much. Or at least that was the belief. And, when you're desperate, you'll try anything, right?
Especially in a time when, let's face it, they didn't exactly have IVF.
Right. So picture this. Leah's son, Reuben, he's out in the fields, and he stumbles upon these mandrakes.
Which, by the way, the podcast I listened to said they actually look kind of, well, suggestive, like the roots resemble a human form.
No way, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. But anyway, back to the story. Rachel sees these mandrakes, and she's like, aha, my ticket to motherhood.
And Leah, being new fool, she sees her chance to get a little something in return.
Because in this whole saga, no one is just giving anything away for free.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what'd she ask for? A night with Jacob.
It's like, oh, you want my magical fertility plant? Sure, it's going to cost you.
Talk about a power move.
Seriously. And it just goes to show, even back then, relationships were complicated. Polygamy or not, there's clearly some tension here.
Big time. And the podcast actually made a really interesting point about this whole exchange.
What's that?
It's like, how often do we try to control things to force outcomes, even when deep down we know it's not really the answer?
Oh, all the time. Like, if I just work hard enough, or if I can just get that promotion, then I'll finally be happy, right?
Right. Or if I just, get those mandrakes.
Yeah.
It's like we're hardwired to seek control, even in situations where, let's face it, we have very little control.
And spoiler alert, it doesn't work. Leah gets pregnant again, but it doesn't magically solve their problems, in fact.
If anything, it probably just makes things more complicated.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, both Rachel and Leah, they're longing for something deeper than just children.
They want that love, that security, that feeling of being chosen.
Absolutely. It's like that old saying, you can have it all and still feel empty.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so heartbreaking about Leah's story.
Yeah. She has the children, but you can tell she still feels this deep sense of insecurity.
And then, just when you think this whole sibling rivalry couldn't get more intense, the story takes another dramatic turn.
Because after years of waiting and watching her sister have child after child, Rachel, finally she gets pregnant.
And it's a boy.
Can you imagine the relief? The sense of like, finally, God has heard my prayers.
It's huge. And it makes you wonder about the timing of it all, right? Like, why now? What was the purpose of all that waiting and pain?
It's like the podcast host was saying, sometimes we think we know what's best for us, but God's got a different plan.
A plan that often unfolds in ways we least expect. But while Rachel and Leah are caught in this whirlwind of motherhood and rivalry, Jacob, he's busy building a life for himself.
And dealing with his own set of challenges, because let's not forget about Laban.
Oh, yeah. Good old Laban. He's not just going to sit back and watch Jacob steal the show.
So we've got Jacob trying to build a life, and then there's Laban, the father-in-law, who's, well, let's just say he's not winning any world's best father-in-law awards.
Not even close. This guy Laban, he's all about playing the angles. He sees Jacob's potential, his work ethic, and instead of being supportive, he's like, how can I use this to my advantage?
So he's kind of like the original workplace manipulator.
Oh, 100%. Changing agreements, trying to cheat Jacob out of his earnings, it's the whole thing.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that really struck me. Even with Laban constantly throwing obstacles in his path, Jacob, he thrives.
It's true. His flocks are multiplying. He's building wealth. It's like Laban throws a wrench in the plan and Jacob comes out on top even stronger. How does he do it?
Well, the podcast actually makes a point of saying it's not just Jacob's cleverness.
Right.
Like, yeah, he's a smart guy. He comes up with these strategies for breeding the livestock, but there's also this idea of divine favor.
So it's like he's working hard, he's being strategic, and he's got something bigger on his side.
Exactly. Like there's this force, this blessing that's multiplying his efforts. And for me, that was a really powerful takeaway.
I can see that. It's like that reminder that even when things are tough, even when it feels like someone's trying to hold you back, there's this potential for, I don't know, for things to work out in a way you never even imagined.
Right. Like your value, your success, it's not ultimately determined by someone else's actions. It's about tapping into something greater than yourself. And, it made me think about how we respond to challenges, especially in the workplace. We've all had that boss, that coworker who seems to make things a little more, shall we say, difficult?
Don't I know it?
But maybe, just maybe, Jacob's story is showing us that sometimes the answer isn't just working harder or trying to outsmart the Labans of the world. Sometimes it's about trusting that there's a bigger picture, a different plan, and sometimes it's about knowing your worth and having the courage to walk away from a situation that's no longer saving you, just like Jacob eventually does with Laban.
It's funny how these ancient stories, they can still feel so relevant, right? It's like we might not be dealing with sheep and mandrakes anymore, but the core human experiences, the desire for love, for family, for that sense of purpose and fulfillment, that never gets old.
It really doesn't. And, speaking of things that never get old, family drama, before we wrap this up, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on, something the podcast mentioned about Leah that really got me thinking.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, it's easy to get caught up in Rachel's story. Her longing for children, her rivalry with Leah. It's dramatic. But we don't often hear about it from Leah's perspective, do we?
That's true. She's kind of like the unsung hero, or maybe the less glamorous sister in all of this.
Exactly. But her story, her experience, it matters too. And the podcast really challenged me to consider, what was it like for her? living in the shadow of her sister, feeling maybe overlooked, maybe unloved, despite having all these children.
It's like we always talk about seeing things from other people's perspectives, but this story really drives that home. We're so quick to judge, to label, to make assumptions about people based on their outward circumstances, but we never really know the full story, do we?
We really don't. And maybe, just maybe, by making space for those untold stories, by resisting the urge to judge and compare, we can find a little more compassion, a little more grace for ourselves and for each other.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think we've just about reached the bottom of this deep dive. Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep an eye out for those hidden depths in these ancient stories and in our own lives.